Hello, beautiful people. This channel has taken a bit of an unexpected turn in recent months, unexpected to me at least, and this is largely down to my newfound love of tinkering with electronics. Sorry, excuse me while I just pick my dog up. And so in that vein, we're going to have another electronics video today. It's really quite weird. Although I don't anticipate this channel turning into an electronics channel, mainly because I'm an absolute novice with this kind of stuff. However, the journey of discovering new creative possibilities and of learning new skills is not only exciting, but I think it's a valuable thing to share with you. So if that sounds interesting, stick with me. I have just been sent a load of electronic components that should allow us to undertake a whole host of different projects. I have a few in mind already. I think I've got about 5 different projects in mind. I'm going to have a go at doing one of those today, maybe 2 if we get time. But yeah, let's get stuck in. Before we do anything else, I suppose we should take a look at what I actually ordered. So here we have an electronic breadboard. This, if you're completely unfamiliar, is basically a way to prototype an electronic circuit without needing to solder things together, essentially. Here we have some sort of jumper cables or connecting wires, and there's a little power unit that you can buy as part of this kit. So this is something that would be very useful for trying to develop circuits for audio effects and things like that. And I have an idea in mind that I would like to try out, something I'd like to build from scratch. I think maybe that's a build for another day, but very useful. And then this other pack, we just have lots of different components. So we've got some diodes here, lots and lots of different value capacitors and diodes, different diodes there. Now, the other thing that I ordered, and I think this is what today's video is going to be about, is this little kit here. So this is a 555 Synth Punk. I should just mention, sorry, all of this stuff I ordered from switchelectronics.co.uk. This video isn't sponsored by them or anything. So in case you're interested in checking out this kit or any of the other kits that they do, I will put links down in the description. What's going on? Where? When did this happen? I guess I'll put links in the description over here. I mean, it's always been, and that's always. Why wasn't I consulted? Were you consulted? I mean, it just beggars belief. These people, what? Just rude. I mean, it's just, why? Well, I mean, it's just rude. I'm incandescent with rage. I just can't believe it. I mean, the audacity to just change things like that. So this, yeah, the 555 Synth Punk. So it's a synth, essentially. You get all the components in a little kit with the PCB board. You even get a little speaker that's probably sounds like crap. But yeah, and what we're going to do, we're going to have a go at building this. Now, I believe that they have the instructions online. There's a QR code that we can scan here. So I'll need to do that before we get started. We'll do that in a moment. I guess I need to clear the decks a little bit. And yeah, we'll come back and we'll see if we can put this thing together. And because this has been designed by someone that presumably knows what they're doing, this thing should work, providing I don't screw it up. So hopefully we'll get a working synth at the end of it. Okay, so first things first, let's take a look and see what we get in this kit. I think I should be able to just open it. There we go. So there's our PCB. Seems very good quality. And then we have a whole bunch of stuff here. So we've got a 9-volt connector. We have a couple of wires there. Let's try and get these in some kind of order. We have a potentiometer. We've got, these are our little switches that will allow us to play the different notes. We've got some trimmer pots here. We've got, these are our ICs, so these are the 555 chips. And we're missing some, right, there's another switch there. That's 4. I thought there's meant to be 5. Oh, there's another one. Okay. So yeah, we've got our IC chips, the 555. I believe these are called 555 timer chips. I could be wrong. We've got little mounting sockets for those chips there. We have, this is a connector for a, is that for a headphone? 3.5mm. Yes, okay, so that's a headphone output, which is good. We have a speaker as well, and presumably these wires are to attach the speaker. We have some transistors, 2 transistors, and I believe these have different denominations. They're slightly different item numbers, so I think they have to go in a certain way. We've got 1 diode, I believe. We've got 2 resistors, and we've got some different capacitors, 1 electrolytic and some ceramic ones, I believe, these little disc capacitors. So that's everything that you get in the kit. So the next thing we really need to do is, I may reference the online schematic and diagrams, but essentially all we need to do is populate this board with the different components, and there it's all labeled up. I don't know if you can see that, but it tells us where things need to go. It's fairly straightforward. He says, this is before I've even attempted to put it together, but we shouldn't have too many issues if we do this sort of methodically. Yeah, and we'll sort of build it up bit by bit. So the first thing we need to do is to start populating this board, and we're going to put in the resistors first. We just need to bend over the legs close to the body of the resistor so that we can slot those into the correct holes on the board. There's R1 and R2 clearly labelled. They're both the same value, so it doesn't matter which way round these go. Once it's in place, I just pull the legs from the underside and then splay the legs out to hold that in place. And then we can do the exact same thing with the second resistor. It can be a little bit fiddly sometimes to get these to slot into the holes, but there it goes. Flip it over, bend the legs just to hold that in place. And then we can do the same thing with the diode. Now with diodes, They are bipolar, so it does matter the direction that this or the orientation that this sits in. There's a shaded area on the diode, and that will match with the shaded area of the diagram on the board. So once we're happy that that's in the right orientation, again, we can just bend over the legs, slot that into place, give it a little tug from the underside, and there we go. You can see that sits down nicely flush with the top of the board, and we can just check everything's where we want it to be. Then we can flip the board over and solder those legs into place. I won't show you all of the soldering, but we'll just take a look at a bit of that. And once that's soldered, we can just check everything looks okay, and then we can snip the remaining legs off that we don't need. And by the last one, I actually figured out to keep hold of these to prevent them from flying all over my room. And then we can just tidy this up a little bit and just snip some of the excess off. So they're the first components soldered into place. So next I'm going to install these switches, and these are the switches that are going to allow us to play the different tones. They look kind of square, but they are slightly rectangular, so they do have a certain orientation that they need to go in. And I'm just making sure there that they're all sitting nice and level and even. For things like this is why I find blue tack very useful, because you can kind of hold everything in place with the blue tack and kind of manipulate it around till you get the right angle. And so I'm just working my way across the board methodically. One thing I found with soldering is that you need to have everything held nice and firmly in position so that you can concentrate on holding your soldering iron in the right place and feeding the solder in, and not having to worry about holding components at the same time. And so there we are. There's all 5 switches soldered in. And now we can move on to the next items. So I'm going to put the transistors in next. So there's 2 of these. They have 3 legs. I needed to splay these legs out a little bit to get them to fit into the holes. They're a little further apart than the legs are, but it doesn't take much just to cajole them into the correct location. And then once again, when they're in the right place, just bend over a couple of the legs, and that should hold everything fairly securely. We'll do the same with the other one. I made sure to check the numbers on these transistors to make sure that I had them in the right location. The part numbers are listed on the website, and they also have a kind of a D shape to them, and the flat side of these transistors face each other with the curved sections facing away from each other, which matches the diagrams on the board. So it's fairly straightforward to see where they need to go. You just need to make sure that you get the right part number in the right slots, but these are labelled up very clearly. And once that's done, we'll move on to the next components. So now we're going to put in these little trimmer pots. And again, these were a little bit fiddly to get in. So I think I decided to do most of these off camera. And in hindsight, I think perhaps I should have put in the IC chip sockets next, as these trim pots sit quite a bit higher. They're quite a bit taller, standing off the board, than the chip sockets, but it all worked out in the end. Spoiler alert. But it may have made more sense to put the sockets in first because they sit a bit lower down and it's kind of easiest to work in that sort of reverse height order. So from the shortest up to the tallest components. But once these are all soldered in, we can move on to the next set of items, which are in fact going to be the IC sockets. I'm not sure that's what they're properly called. I do have the packet in front of me, so let me see what they call them on here, if I can find them. Oh, 8-dip socket. Okay. It's an 8-dip socket, if anyone's interested. So there's 2 of these. If you happen to be doing this build or something similar, most IC chips that I've worked with in my very limited experience tend to have a kind of a notch on one end, so like a little D-shaped notch, and that will give you an indication as to the orientation that they're meant to sit in, and there will be a matching diagram on the PCB board that will show you where these things need to sit in which direction. In case you're wondering, an IC is an integrated circuit. So you may hear me calling them ICs or chips. But yeah, I mean the same thing, whatever terminology I'm using. And so next I decided to install the 3.5mm jack, the phono jack socket. And everything's looking quite nice and neat. Now, at this point, I realized I'd forgotten to put the capacitors in. I think I'd intended to put these in sooner, but it doesn't really matter. They went in easy enough. I decided to clip them out of this paper sort of wrap packaging that they come in, just because it felt like I might damage them trying to pull them free. So I decided to clip them off instead. We don't need particularly long legs on these. So there's 4 of these disc capacitors and they're all the same value, so it doesn't matter where they go, as long as we don't mix up one of these for the electrolytic capacitor. They can go in any order. Again, I needed to just ease the legs apart a little bit. And these can be manipulated and kind of moved around once they're sort of in place, just to make sure that they're not touching up against any other components. And once again, we need to solder these in. So now here I am trying to put in the actual IC into the socket. This was quite tricky for me to see with the camera in the way, so I don't know if I got particularly good footage of this. I think the second one went in much easier. With that, I think we've only have a few components left to install. So next I decided to put in the electrolytic capacitor. Now this one has a polarity. So you might notice that there's a light coloured shaded part on this capacitor, and that corresponds with a shorter leg, and that is the negative side. The longer leg is the positive side. And there's a diagram with the shaded part. So you do need to get this in the right direction. But it's really straightforward as long as you just use a little bit of common sense and you're a little bit methodical about how you're working, and you just pay attention to the diagrams. It's all fairly straightforward. And then we can clip the legs on this, and we're nearly done. We just need to solder in the main potentiometer. This is a 100K pot. It was difficult to get it to sit nice and perpendicular to the board, so I think I decided just to solder in the middle leg first. And once that was secured, I was able to just gently lean the potentiometer forward a bit to straighten it up and make sure it was or as close to a 90-degree angle as I could get it. And then I could solder on the other two legs. And at that point, we were pretty much done. Now, I did forget to solder on the 9-volt battery adapter. So I did that off camera. I chose not to attach the speaker, mainly because these small type of speakers are not usually very good quality, and they can't replicate low frequencies in particular. So I decided just to leave that off the board and try and capture some audio using the headphone output. But there it is, done. Synth Punk 455. Right, so here we have the finished 555 Synth Punk. Now, just before I give you some sound demos, hang on, before I give you some sound demos, let me just speak very quickly. So what I've noticed when I plug in a cable, when I output the sound through this headphone socket, the output signal is incredibly loud. It's super loud. Now, what I'm going to do in a minute is I'm going to run it through this pedal because that reduces the signal a fair amount. But even then, I'm running it into my audio interface, and the volume of the input on the audio interface is all the way down. I mean, it's literally set to 0, and it's still too loud. So if you are going to have a go at building this device yourself, just please take some precautions. Don't just go and plug a pair of headphones in when it's done and listen back, because it's so loud. I dread to even think what it's like listening through headphones. Also, you could damage speakers and things like that. So just a word of warning. But anyway, with that being said, let's just... there is one other thing I want to point out. I've watched some videos of other people that have built this online, and this one doesn't seem to behave the way that those do. And what I've noticed is that when these potentiometers are sort of turned by other versions that people have made, that seems to make a very neat kind of pitch sweep up and down, but mine seems to do some kind of weird things. Now, I'm not really too fussed about that. I don't think I've done anything wrong. It could be that some of the components, or one of the components maybe, is not functioning as it should be. Maybe it's not the value it should be. I don't know. But it's making sound, so that's good enough for me. And to be honest, I quite like weird, unpredictable things anyway. So I'm not worried about that, but just another disclaimer or point of interest. So let me just connect up these batteries and I'll give you some sound examples, a bit of a demonstration. So let's click that on. So what we do to make sound, we literally just click these switches, these 5 switches, and in theory we should be able to turn these potentiometers to get different pitches. I think you can probably hear that mine isn't so it's not exactly giving us a nice sort of pitch sweep, but it is doing some interesting things. And then we've also got this potentiometer here, so if I play one of these, so this gives us some stepped pitches. Again, quite interesting. This one seems to go really high. Very, very high pitched. When does your hearing stop being able to perceive this? Oh, about there for me. Okay, I quite like that though. Get some nice zap sound effects for that, from that. Yeah, so also the way that this is sort of designed, it's not the most playable thing. These switches are quite hard to get to. I'm using a screwdriver obviously to change these potentiometers. I don't think that would be the most ideal setup for a live situation, but you know, you could definitely use it in a performance. I quite like the weird unpredictability of this, but yeah, okay. Well, there you go. We have a working, functional synth of some description. It's really quite weird, but I do like it. I like things like this. So that's it. That's the build. I'm not going to leave it there though. Yesterday, after I'd finished building this, I had a little play around off camera and I recorded a couple of tape loops. I recorded that into the DAW and then I've done a little bit more processing. So I've created a track. I think it's come out sounding quite cinematic and quite dramatic. I really like it. I didn't film any of that, as I say. So what I have done is I've put together hopefully some interesting visuals to go along with it. So I'll leave you with that. But thank you for watching. Thank you for staying tuned all the way to this part. If you have stuck with me this long, I really do appreciate it. But yeah. Oh, like and subscribe as well, please. If you're not already subscribed, I know about 80% of you that watch these videos aren't subscribed. So if you can and you want to support the channel, that's one very simple way that you can do that. So I really would appreciate that. Obviously, you don't have to. I'll leave it up to you. But whatever you do, I hope to see you again real soon. Peace out.